Greetings, Lord Captains. Ghost here, and today I'm presenting a beginner's guide on Rogue Trader's combat, updated to 1.4 patch and the last DLC, Lex Imperialis. This game is now on Game Pass 2, and a lot of people are trying it for the first time. Rogue Trader has a lot of combat, and can be pretty dense in detail. It's not unusual to feel overwhelmed, and since I've played this game a lot, I can try to help you understand the basic concepts of combat. As I said, this is a beginner's guide, so I'll go through the raw basics, doing my best to be clear. Maybe you looked for how to make your character and companions work, and found a lot of builds for unfair difficulty. But why do they work? Did you rebuild Argenta to be the absolute death dealer following a guide, but you don't understand how to really use her and why she's so strong? I hope to shed some light on these kind of matters. The guide is divided into chapters. Feel free to check the part that might be the most obscure for you. Also, this is not going to be a use this ability at this moment type of guide, but more about what the most important terms mean, how the fundamental mechanics work, and how all of it fits together. First of all, let's talk about the game difficulty. Maybe you've seen some of those same builds for unfair difficulty, or some streamer playing on it and think less of yourself because you can't face it. Don't let anyone tell you how to play your game. You bought it, you play it the way you like it. Unfair is a really hard difficulty, and playing on it, especially at the beginning of the campaign, might rely on cheese and broken builds or broken systems that slowly get fixed in patches. If you're new to the game, don't do it. If you want to play it on story, that's cool. The game has 5 difficulties, going from story to unfair, and the possibility to customize your own experience. My personal suggestion for newcomers, though, is to play it on normal or daring. If you want to engage with game systems, story might not be the best choice, since you don't need to understand much to succeed in it. It's a difficulty meant for people who just want to enjoy the campaign's narrative. Again, if that's what you want, go for it. But in this case, you don't need a guide. As you see, every difficulty applies some modifiers to the game's core mechanics, like altering the enemy's dodge modifier or cover bonuses, skill test difficulty, and so on. The most fair of those difficulties is daring, modifying the least amount of mechanics, and, in my opinion, it's actually the difficulty the game is meant to be played on. This difficulty can engage you, but it's not insurmountable. It makes you think to understand what's going on. To unlock some achievements, if you're interested in them, you have to play on daring or above. First, let's talk a bit about the character sheet, because understanding the core stats is important to succeed in combat. Every character has 9 characteristics, going from weapon skill to fellowship. They start from 30, or 25 if you've made some character creation choices that impose a malus of -5 on one of them, and can reach values like 200. I don't believe there is a hard cap on characteristics, more of a soft one based on how many characteristic advancements the game lets you buy before reaching max rank 55. This game calls levels ranks, by the way. Let's introduce some of the jargon since we're here. Besides leveling up, special events or colony projects may grant you a permanent increase in a specific characteristic. I think this is a good moment to mention that those little green numbers with a triangle next to your characteristic or skill scores represent the various bonuses you have from talents, equipment, or other sources. They are already included in the characteristic or skill value shown in green. For example, if you read the green 45 for one of your characteristic values, but there is a smaller +5 near a green triangle, that means your base value is actually 40, and you reach 45 thanks to some other bonuses. When the game refers to a characteristic bonus, it means dividing the actual characteristics value by 10 and considering only the whole number. For example, a ballistic skill of 95 has a ballistic skill bonus of +9, an intelligence score of 30 has an intelligence bonus of +3. Now, let's go through those characteristics. I know it may be tedious, but in a game like this, it's important to have at least a basic understanding of them. Weapon skill is your melee combat skill. It influences your character's parry chance, decreases your target's one, and also increases your chances of scoring a critical hit in close combat. The melee combat mechanic is quite detailed in this game. I'll talk more about it later. For now, just absorb the notion that if you want to go melee, you better have a high weapon skill. Ballistic skill is the equivalent of weapon skill for ranged combat. It measures the character's accuracy with all forms of ranged weapons. The ranged combat mechanic is calculated differently from the melee one. Again, more on this later. If you want a sniper or a heavy gunner, this is a core characteristic to have. Strength represents how physically strong the character is and increases the damage they do with melee weapons. For every bonus point in strength, you increase your melee damage by plus 5% if you're wielding a one-hand melee weapon, or by plus 10% if it's a two-handed one. So, if you have 50 in strength and your character is wielding a two-handed sword, you'll do plus 50% damage. If you're wielding a one-hand melee weapon with the same strength value, your character will deal plus 25% damage. Strength also affects your athletic skill. I'll talk about skills later. If you want a melee character, probably investing in strength is not a bad idea. Toughness is how physically resistant the character is. It increases the chances of resisting negative effects, poisons, diseases, and increases your wounds. Wounds is the name of hit points in Rogue Trader. Each point of toughness bonus gives you plus 10% wounds. It also increases the carouse skill. This is a very good characteristic for a tanky character to have. Agility is your character's weakness. It influences initiative, dodge, and dodge reduction if you're using melee weapons. Initiative, Rogue Trader being a turn-based game, is when you're going to act in the combat order. Dodge is the chance of dodging an enemy attack, negating both melee and ranged damage. Dodge reduction is a parameter used for calculating your chances of hitting an enemy. Again, combat is pretty detailed in Rogue Trader. Try to just absorb those loose concepts for now. I'll explain them in detail later. Agility also affects the demolition skill. This is an important characteristic to have in a wide variety of character builds, essentially when you want a better chance to act early in the combat queue, to dodge enemy attacks, and to land your melee hits. Intelligence is self-explanatory and influences non-burst ranged area attacks, like plasma, melta, shotguns, and flamer weapons, giving a plus 5% damage bonus for every intelligence bonus point. Perhaps more importantly, it influences a lot of skills, all the lore skills, Imperium, Warp, Xenos, Logic, Medicae, and Tech use, very important for skill monkey characters, and for specific builds that, through peculiar talents, use intelligence instead of other characteristics for skill or damage. Perception is how a character is, well, perceptive, and is unassumingly very important. Besides influencing the awareness skill, which is super important, it reduces the dodge chance against your ranged attacks, because your base dodge reduction becomes your perception score. For now that I haven't explained how ranged combat is calculated yet, just consider that high perception means your shots will be dodged a lot less. Willpower is your essential saving throw against negative mental effects, the horrors of the warp, and psychic powers. Maybe more importantly, a lot of psychers and navigators' powers and talents scale with willpower. Fellowship is essentially your charisma, and it influences your persuasion, coercion, and commerce skills. These skills are very important in dialogue. I mean, they lead to completely different outcomes that can be very beneficial, and for specific archetypes like officers. Now we have 13 skills to consider. I already had you go through the characteristic list, so I won't bore you by explaining every single one of them. Most of them are used in dialogue or in interactions with the world. Don't worry about the line of icons and numbers between your characteristics and skills. I'll talk about them in a moment. Consider that skills are used to pass tests of some kind, like opening a locked container, disarming a trap, remembering a notion about something, jumping over a chasm, and stuff like that. Talking about characteristics, I told you how every one of them influences one or more skills, and on the character sheets, it's clearly indicated by little tags. A skill value is given by the associated characteristic value, plus the advancements you bought or level up, plus some specific talents that you may unlock through special events, colony projects, or some items. I'm just briefly mentioning skills because, depending on your build, some of them may influence your performance in combat. For example, the soldier archetype can buy a talent called Demolition Engineer. It allows the use of the demolition skill instead of the intelligence characteristic to calculate bonus damage for ranged area attacks. Or the arbitrator's talent Mob Justice increases the damage of allies in a 3-cell radius around the arbitrator, scaling with coercion. You may want to pay attention to these talents and items, taking them into consideration for your combat performance. I can't list them all in a video decent length. Now, let's go back to that line I skipped before. I improperly called this line the defense line because there are two parameters that have nothing to do with defense, but all the others do. The first parameter is deflection, and it depends on your armor and some talents. Deflection is the amount of damage your character subtracts from any hit, except for some specific psychic power damage. It's a flat reduction that that's applied to every hit, very useful against burst weapons and rapid fire damage. The second parameter is armor. It's the percentage of damage that's reduced when you take a hit, after deflection has already been considered. For example, you take a hit for 12 damage. If you have a deflection of 2, the hit will be for 10 damage, and if you have armor of 50%, you'll receive 5 damage. Other parameters like armor penetration may change this calculation, but for ease of understanding, that's how it generally works. For clarity, armor penetration is one of the main weapon parameters, and you subtract it from the actual armor percentage of your target. For example, if you are using a weapon with 40% armor penetration, and your target has the same 50% armor, they're going to consider only 10% armor reduction when calculating damage, after deflection has been subtracted. The next parameter in the line is dodge. It's the chance to completely negate damage because you or your target effectively dodge an attack. Base dodge is 30 plus target's agility minus attacker's dodge reduction, and it's a percentage. Abilities, talents, or other effects may modify this calculation. A special situation happens when trying to dodge a ranged weapon area attack, like the ones from shotguns, flamers, plasma weapons, and the like. When trying to dodge the area attack, a character needs to move up to 3 cells in order to leave the affected area. If, for whatever reason, it's impossible to leave that area, they automatically take a hit. At this point, keep in mind that medium and heavy armor have better deflection and, well, armor, but reduce your dodge chance. Then on the same line we have dodge reduction, which I've just explained how it works and how it's calculated. Half agility for melee, perception for ranged. Next in line we have parry. Parry is only taken into consideration in melee combat. If a character is attacked in melee and has a melee weapon equipped, they will try to dodge and parry the attack. Bear with me for a second, because parry is slightly complex. A character's parry chance is equal to 20 plus the target's weapon skill plus various parry bonuses they may have, minus the attacker's weapon skill added to their parry reduction. And melee superiority can be taken into account, plus various talents and abilities. Melee superiority is a bonus that triggers when a target is surrounded by more enemies than allies. The attacker receives a plus 10 weapon skill bonus for each ally surrounding its target. Larger enemies need to be surrounded by more than 2 enemies for melee superiority to be taken into account. Some talents, items, and various bonuses can alter the base formula or allow a character to pair with a ranged weapon and use ballistic skill instead. Now, I know this is a lot, and I suggest a rule of thumb. If you want a melee character, make weapon skill your priority to raise, followed by agility to have a good dodge reduction. Strength and toughness are also useful. Avoid being surrounded at the beginning, and take the Combat Master talent as soon as you can, as it negates the melee superiority bonuses against the character. Resolve is the second non-defensive parameter in this line. It influences how much momentum you gain at the start of your turn or when killing an enemy. Momentum is the blue line over the character's skills. It essentially determines the group's morale and when you can use the heroic axe or desperate measures. A character's resolve base value is equal to their fellowship bonus. This can change due to various abilities, talents, and effects. A last defense stat is block. It's been introduced in the 1.4 update, and it does not appear in the character sheet, but this is a good place to explain it since we're talking about all kinds of defense. Block does not depend on the character's abilities, but only on a shield's block chance. It can completely negate damage if successful, and it's incredibly useful against burst attacks. If the first hit is blocked, all the subsequent hits are automatically blocked, without the need to reroll the chance. It stacks with all the other lines of defense, so, assuming you are equipping a shield, you'll be blocking, dodging, and if the hit still connects, deflecting and reducing damage through armor. All archetypes can use shields, except Xenos and Space Marines. As the last thing I want you to note in your character sheet, if you click on the Weapons tab to the left of your skills, you'll see a summary of the equipped weapons. The first parameter is damage range, followed by the maximum number of ammunition a clip of that weapon contains, armor penetration, the weapon's range, and its associated attacks. I usually refer to the inventory screen for this data, but it may be useful to have a quick summary at hand. Weapons can be largely divided into ranged, melee, and psyker weapons, like staves. Melee weapons have the type of melee weapon they are, like chain, power, or force. It's important to know the type of weapon you're wielding, because it synergizes with some talents you might have. Then we have the damage, range, and armor penetration. The first one is pretty self-explanatory, but armor penetration is a very important stat, since you will face some pretty well-armored enemies. It indicates the percentage of the enemy's armor we're subtracting when hitting them. For example, if they have 80% armor and we hit them with a weapon that has 40% armor penetration, the armor to be considered for mitigating damage is only the remaining 40%. Then we have the weapon abilities, which are the types of attack this weapon permits. They're mostly single target and area attacks for melee weapons. And on the bottom, some peculiar properties it may have. Ranged weapons follow similar pattern, having a weapon type, a damage range, armor penetration, and so on. What ranged weapons add is rate of fire with recoil, range, and max ammo. While the last two are pretty obvious, rate of fire is the amount of bullets a burst attack with that weapon will fire and spread in an area. This is done at the cost of accuracy. And recoil is the percentage to hit you lose with every subsequent shot fired in the same burst attack. Some ranged weapons have a rate of fire of 1, like a sniper rifle or a flamer. In this case, obviously, they don't have a recoil stat, nor can you burst attack with them. Staves are psychic weapons. They're a bit peculiar because they permit a melee attack and a specific psychic attack that a psyker may perform, even if they don't have that related ability in their character's repertoire. Almost every stuff is different, and you have to carefully read what its ability does and how it does it. Also, some swords scale with psi rating, which is the power rank of the psyker. Now that we have covered the character sheet basics, let's start talking about what happens when you actually get into combat. The first thing you'll see, unless you get ambushed, is the tactical phase. The game will tell you to position your party members before initiating the actual combat, and you usually want to take up advantageous positions. If you're ambushed, you lose the tactical phase and have to immediately start combat. In the tactical phase, you can freely select any character in your party and move them to a cell in a green-colored grid. This grid will be different for every party member because it depends on their original positioning when combat started and their movement points. More on movement points later. Speaking of initial positioning, you can choose a party formation in the game menu, choosing between different presets or making your own. This might be useful, but in my experience not that much. I prefer to manually choose my combat start positioning through the tactical phase. You can't place a melee character directly in front of an enemy unless they have specific talents. A red overlay will remind you of it. A thing that's really tied to the tactical phase is the cover mechanic. You can take advantage of cover during the actual fight too, of course, but the tactical phase is the first moment in combat in which you'll be looking for it. Cover allows a character the chance of avoiding enemy ranged attacks, and it comes in two forms. Full cover, indicated by a skull and a shield, and partial cover, indicated by a half-full shield. Cover works only for ranged attacks coming from the opposite side of a character's cover. Normally, full cover reduces the chances of being hit by 60%, and partial cover by 35%. I say normally because those values may vary depending on the difficulty you're playing, and abilities and talents the attacker and the defender may have. When a cover test is made, the game rolls a D100, a virtual die with 100 faces, if you're unfamiliar with the RPG term, and the test is passed if the result is lower than the difficulty. For example, for a full cover test, without external modifiers for ease of explanation, you have to roll less than 60 on the D100 die to avoid damage from the enemy attack. Cover does not protect from melee attacks, since the attacker is right on you, and area attacks can ruin destructible cover. If the cover is destructible, on a successful cover test it will take damage in place of the character hiding behind it, and it may get destroyed. Some cover, like a certain type of barrel, may explode when destroyed, so pay attention to what you're hiding behind. These are not the only differences between different cover types. Full cover protects a character from one side, and to make a ranged attack, they will automatically step out onto an unoccupied cell nearby, to hide again behind the full cover once the attack is completed. Enemies can attack a character behind full cover only if they see the cell the character is on, or if they can see the cell the character is stepping onto when making their attacks. Partial cover protects from attacks coming from at least one cell away from it, but not directly next to it. Depending on how you build your party, you may want to look for cover or maybe not. Some players create an entire party based on characters that synergize when they are next to each other, and disregard the cover mechanic because the party is stronger when bundled together. At the end of the day, I would say the cover mechanic is important but not essential, depending on your choices. Keep in mind that enemies will make use of it though, so understanding how it works is useful. Let's suppose you have positioned your party during the tactical phase. Now what? When the fight actually starts, you'll see on the left of your screen a stack of characters and enemies icons. Being Rogue Trader a turn-based game, this stack represents combat initiative, and it goes from bottom to top. I don't know why they didn't go for the more intuitive queue on the top, going from left to right like in the Pathfinder games, but it's the same concept, just shown vertically. Initiative is calculated in a bit of a weird way, due to the large amount of actors present in every combat. I'm going to explain how it's calculated and then give you another rule of thumb. At the beginning of each battle, all characters are separated into allied and enemy groups, with 2 to 4 characters in each. Every allied group turn alternates with an enemy group turn. Again, this is quite strange, but was made to avoid destroying the party with RNG when rolling a bad initiative, so the enemies won't go all together at once, mowing you down. How the group's initiative is calculated is unique. The higher a single character's initiative is, the higher the possibility to act first, or more technically, to be placed in the high initiative group. A character's initiative is calculated by adding their agility bonus to half their perception bonus, plus a random number from 1 to 10. A group's initiative is given by calculating the average of all characters' initiative belonging to that group. Another rule of thumb here is that high agility and high perception characters go first, but it's not guaranteed. You may not end up in the first group to go, maybe because that character has been paired with other characters that rolled poorly, or don't have a lot in those needed characteristics. One strategy is to take advantage of the Grand Strategist second-tier archetype, which always goes first, paired with the Officer first-tier archetype, so you can start bouncing extra turns around at the very beginning of the fight. Start killing, gain momentum, use your heroic act to grant another turn, and you see where this is going, especially in parties with a lot of officers. The very next mechanics you encounter after the tactical phase, meaning when the fight actually starts, are the movement points and the action points mechanics, often abbreviated as MPs and APs. They are represented by the green and yellow bars you have on a character portrait's sides. Green is movement, yellow is action. They're also shown as numbers under the corresponding bars. The green horizontal bar is the character's wounds. More about wounds later. Movement points are expended moving on the battlefield at the cost of 1 MP for every cell. Moving diagonally is more costly, since every second diagonal cell costs 2 MPs. You don't really need to count. The UI does a good job of showing you the area you can move in around the character with a green overlay. NPs are replenished every turn. At the first click of the mouse on a reachable cell, the game will show you a hologram of the character and the line of sight they have to the enemies. You can confirm your move by clicking on the cell a second time, or try better positioning elsewhere. If you right-click, the hologram will be cancelled. It's a useful system to have a projection of what your next move may be, but sometimes you will forget about a hologram you've placed, use an ability, and the character will run to the hologram placement before using that ability. Experience helps a little here. The more you play, the less it will happen. Action points are a resource you expend when using your abilities. Those abilities can be buffs, debuffs, attacks, and so on. They replenish every turn, and leveling up you'll get more of them. You can generally perform 1 attack per round, at least at the beginning of the game. This means that the attack will deplete all your action and movement points. This is clearly shown on the abilities tooltip when you hover the cursor over it, or over the MPs and APs bars. Obviously, you should spend all your APs during your turn to be the most effective and efficient. So, generally speaking, buff, debuff, and attack last. Of course, there are exceptions on this, it's not written in stone. Soon you'll gain abilities and talents that let you attack more than once per round, even on the same character, or passing attack rounds around your party. For example, the most notorious is the officer's ability Bring It Down, that immediately grants an ally an extra turn with 2 APs. Or, still stay in officer's territory, the heroic act Finest Hour grants an ally an extra turn with full APs and MPs. You can imagine how support characters can become very powerful and important in this game, as much as gaining huge amounts of momentum every turn. Now that we are finally into the fun part, how does all of it work? Sure, if you're melee, you move near target and try to stab or maul it to death. If you're ranged, you shoot it. But it's helpful to understand how this works under the hood. A first good tip is to always right-click on your enemies and study their characteristics, abilities, and talents. Maybe you want to reduce that Hellbrute's armor before starting to burst it. I can't even begin to list all the possible variations you may encounter in an enemy character sheet. You need to exercise some patience patience and start reading. With some experience under your belt, you won't need to check all the cannon fodder sheets anymore, just the boss's ones. Melee weapons can perform single attacks, melee burst attacks, and melee area attacks. When you attack your target with a melee weapon, they will try to both dodge and parry. Remember the rule of thumb. The higher the attacker's weapon skill is compared to their targets, the higher the chance that the attack will not be parried. Remember that dodge reduction for melee attacks is half of the attacker's agility. A special melee attack is the attack of opportunity. It's a free attack that a character with a melee weapon equipped can make when an enemy in an adjacent cell starts movement. Some abilities, talents, and items may grant an attack of opportunity under different conditions. The chance to hit and the damage dealt are calculated like a normal melee attack. Ranged weapons can do single shots, burst, and area attacks. The logic here is a little different. When attacking with a ranged weapon, the character will do a ballistic skill characteristic test. They have to roll a d100 and score under their skill value. The game will modify this test result considering the distance between the attacker and the target, the weapon's effective range, and all those abilities, talents, and items that affect each chance. If successful, then the target will try to dodge, taking into consideration all the mechanics I've mentioned before regarding dodge. If the target is behind cover, a cover test would also be made to successfully avoid the attack. Block will also be taken into consideration if the target has a shield. Essentially, if the attacker hits and the target fails to block, dodge, or take cover, damage is calculated. Another rule of thumb here, when making a ranged character, ballistic skill and perception are paramount. Keep them as high as you can. Remember that perception is a ranged character's dodge reduction. A detail that may be useful to note is that ranged weapons have an effective range and a maximum range. Shots against a target in effective range have no penalties, while at maximum range they incur into maluses. If it's a single shot, its chance to hit is reduced by half. If it's a burst, the shot's chance to follow the central trajectory are halved, and the number of possible deviation trajectories is doubled. Always pay attention to friendly fire when using burst or area attacks, and to over-penetration with single shots. Over-penetration is the chance that a bullet passes through your target and hits the target behind it too. Psychic powers are special abilities psychers have. They're the closest thing to spellcasting that the Warhammer 40k settings allows. They are wildly different from one another. They can be buffs, debuffs, attacks, and so on. There are also different types of psychic power, like biomancy, pyromancy, sanctity powers, telepathy, and divination. And all of them do different stuff. Psychic powers deserve a video on their own, for the sake of brevity and since this video is not on how to build a psyker. I'm just putting a brief mention here because some of their powers are definitely a third type of attack that's not melee or ranged. Now, let's talk about critical hits. Critical hits are a chance of dealing increased damage to an enemy, normally 150%. The base chance is 10% for ranged weapons, 0% for melee. With a ranged weapon, critical chance is increased by 1% for every 1% over 95% hit chance. It means that if an attacker with a rifle has, for example, a 107% chance to hit, the real chance to hit will always be capped at 95%, with a 5% chance of missing, but the critical chance will be 22%. The base 10 plus the difference between 107 and 95. In melee, critical chance is increased by 1% for every point of difference between the character's weapon skill and their target. Talents, effects, and abilities could increase those amounts, and critical damage also depends on a weapon's properties. To close this chapter, keep in mind that this is a turn-based combat game, with a lot of enemies in almost every fight, in true Warhammer 40k fashion. In most of those fights, you'll face a lot of weak enemies among the stronger ones. Their purpose is to serve as cannon fodder to feed your momentum bar. Your general strategy should be to annihilate them, build momentum, and use your stronger abilities like Heroic Axe on the stronger ones, or to use them to stack bonuses upon bonuses given by various talents, abilities, and items, so you'll be much stronger when facing the big ones. Now that we know how to hurt and kill our enemies, it's time to introduce the momentum and veil degradation bars. Veil degradation is the purple bar on the left of your character portrait, above your weapon attacks. It represents the risks that the power of the warp will seep into reality, possibly leading to unwanted consequences. Normally, the veil degradation meter starts at 0, and it's increased every time a psyker power is used during combat until it reaches 20. It increases by 1 for each minor power used, and by 3 for each major one. To know if a power is minor or major, right-click on it. It's indicated near the veil degradation part. The worse the veil degradation, the bigger the chance that psychic phenomena or perils of the warp will trigger. Psychic phenomena are not terribly dangerous. They are represented by intruding into other people's thoughts or causing visions. They can distract allies from combat, lower the party's momentum, or cause bad luck. Perils of the warp are much more dangerous phenomena. They may happen when veil degradation reaches 15 and the major psychic power is used. This manifestation can push characters away from the psyker, damage them, or even summon demons. The chance of them happening is 10 plus the psyker's psi rating plus veil degradation. Having a psyker in the party can be a boon, since they can be very powerful, but also a danger. Some fights start with veil degradation already high, for example when interrupting a cultist ritual or when fighting demons, making the use of psykers in those types of combats a big hazard. Momentum is the party morale, and it's represented by the blue bar on the right of your character's portrait, right above their abilities. It goes from 0 to 200. Normally, over 175 you can activate your party's heroic acts. Below 25 they're desperate measures, and it starts at 100. Abilities, talents, and items can change this general rule, as you've learned to expect by now. Desperate measures have some negative effects accompanying them. The first use of a heroic act costs 75 momentum points, and for each subsequent one, the cost increases by 25. Usually, you can't use the same heroic act or desperate measure twice in the same combat, but there are exceptions to this rule. The momentum's value constantly changes during combat, based on a party member's resolve stat. I've briefly mentioned this before, but here is the nitty-gritty of it. A character's resolve base value is equal to their fellowship bonus. This number can change, again, due to various abilities, talents, and effects. During combat, momentum may change due to a variety of events. If a character that has not yet used their heroic act or desperate measure starts their turn, the party momentum is increased by their resolve. Or, killing an enemy increases the momentum by the attacker's resolve times the enemy's difficulty tier. More on this in a second. Or, if a party member drops to 0 wounds in combat, the momentum decreases by the resolve of the fallen times 10. For completeness, I'm going to say that the enemy difficulty tier is the Roman numeral on the initiative icon. It goes from 1 to 7 and is simply a way to indicate how strong they are. Some talents or abilities may grant some buffs or debuffs, depending on the difficulty tier of the enemy targeted. In Rogue Trader, there is a whole injury system. If a character drops below a certain percentage of their wounds in the same round, the exact number depending on the difficulty you're playing on, they will receive a fresh injury. This injury will reduce the character's resolve. You can heal it using a medikit. If you don't, after 3 rounds, it will become an old injury. The difference is that an old injury can be healed not only using a medikit, but also by passing a medikit test. I've never found this difference to be incredibly significant, because only characters trained in Medicaid can use medkits, so it's kinda the same thing. If a character drops to 0 wounds in combat, or receives a certain number of injuries, again depending on the difficulty, they will develop a trauma. Party members don't die in this game. They fall unconscious on the ground, and at the end of the fight, they will get up with traumas. Traumas are debuffs that can be healed by returning to your void ship, since you have a hospital on board, or by using a chirurgeon medkit. This special medkit is produced over time on Janus, one of your planets, by the Capella Biologist Colony Project. A project I always take care of completing, since I found the chirurgeon medkit incredibly useful. I want to conclude this, I hope, helpful video with the Void Combat section. It's still combat, after all. In Rogue Trader, you won't only be fighting on the ground, but also in space. Luckily, it's a much less complex way of fighting. I can't make this section of the same quality level as the others, because space combat is quite wonky. I cannot be as precise as I strive to be for ground combat. Information provided in the tutorials and in the Corpus Valansus Encyclopedia are often contradicted by the game's behavior itself. As a Rogue Trader, you have your dynasty's void ship at your disposal. You'll use it to warp from system to system, and of course to fight pirates, Xenos, and other enemies of humanity's ships. If you complete the Shield of the Emperor Dargonus colony project, you'll have a second ship escorting you in your travels. You can't control this Imperial Navy ship, and it's pretty weak, but it's another target on the battlefield that's not you. Furthermore, if you have the DLC Lex Imperialis installed, you may acquire another escort ship, the Heartless. You can't control it either, but it's much better equipped and quite strong. With 3 ships on your side, void combat can be easily approached, and I feel this is the most important piece of advice I can give you. Moving on, your ship has its own equipment slots: engine, shields, weapons, targeting systems, and so on. All of this is quite easy to deal with. Always equip the ship component at your disposal with the highest numbers. Ignore the flak cannon or the fighter deck, at least in my opinion. Also, ignore shields or plating that give different protection on different ship sides or against different enemy weapon types. Sure, you can work around and even take advantage of them when you know exactly what you're going to face in every planetary system, but this is a beginner's guide, and frankly, this approach just works for me, even at higher difficulties. Never unequip your torpedo tubes in favor of another kind of weapon. Torpedoes deal an exceptional amount of damage, and, even if they don't connect, they are other targets on the battlefield for the enemy to shoot at. You can upgrade your ship's hull and ram using scrap. You gather scrap from winning void battles and from some other very minor sources. While increasing the hull integrity straight up increases your ship's hit points, so it's mandatory. I never found the ram to be very useful. Ramming an enemy ship damages your flagship too, so in my opinion it's not a good trade-off. You'll find new ship components as loot from space battles, but you'll obtain most of them from the Imperial Navy. Every space combat, assuming you are victorious, drops trophies of some kind: pirate, chaos, and Xenos ones. This is also easy because you can exchange them for increasing your reputation, but only with the same Imperial Navy, so you can't possibly be mistaken here. Check with them regularly, and always equip the biggest, badass component you can. Your flagship also has its own levels, and obviously, you gain experience by destroying other ships. When you gain a level, you have the possibility to choose 2 new flagship developments, as they are called. They're essentially the ship's abilities and talents. Every few ranks, distributed irregularly, you have the possibility to unlock ultimate abilities. Do not use these slots to buy normal talents or abilities. You lose your opportunity to gain the most powerful ones. Sometimes it's not very clear what an ultimate ability is and what is not. Pay attention to the new abilities popping out when you reach those levels. Exercise a little caution here. Ultimate abilities are much more powerful abilities that require quite a lot of time to recharge. You might find that a previously used ultimate ability might not be available for the next few fights. Save them for the big battles. You may want to know how much time it requires to reload an ultimate ability and how exactly this time is calculated. These are good questions, but I cannot help you because the mechanic behind it is absolutely not clear. The mechanics glossary is not clear about them. The tutorial is not clear about them. Some people on the internet believe that recharging those ultimates works as momentum, increasingly filling their meter as you perform well in battle. Others testify to have seen it decrease instead of increase, even when performing well. Some players think the time passed is calculated by doing warp jumps along routes that are not safe, meaning every route that's not green. But others say they try to waste time by doing unsafe or even more difficult jumps, and the ultimates did not recharge. You see where this is going. A rule of thumb is to use your ultimates only in very difficult battles, and there are just a bunch of them in the whole game. Try to spread those battles during your playthrough. Don't do them one next to the other. Do the Shield of the Emperor colony project and salvage the Heartless in Lex Imperialis, so you have a small fleet at your disposal. Following this advice, the only real difficult battle you'll be facing will be the Void Station fight in Void Shadows, and you can pretty much choose when to do it. The most important ultimate ability you should have is All Hands on Deck, letting you shoot 3 torpedo salvos instead of 1. It lasts for more turns, depending on your Master Cannoneer demolition skill. More about posts in a moment. Another useful ability is Empyrean Storm. It makes 7 warp damage attacks against random enemies in an 8-cell range around your flagship. It lasts 1 more round for every 10 points in lore warp your warp channeler has. There are other useful abilities, but those 2 are, in my opinion, the best ones. For non-ultimates, I suggest taking New Heading, Shallow Jump, and Strafe as soon as you can to help you with positioning on the battlefield. Reinforce shields is pretty much mandatory, allowing you to reinforce a chosen sector of the Void ship's shields, useful when a lot of enemies are attacking you from the same direction or when that section's shield is getting weaker. Arc Augury is also pretty neat, increasing the range of your ship's shots by 2. Silent Run in 1 and 2 are also a must, allowing you to go first in battle. I'm not saying there are no more useful abilities or talents, just that these are the ones I always take and as soon as possible. Now, for posts, there are 6 of them, and when you select one, the game will tell you who, among your companions, is the most apt to be assigned to. Every post's effectiveness scales with a skill. Just choose the companion with the biggest value. A couple of posts let you upgrade the relative ability for some scraps, do it when you can. This part of the ship management feels not incredibly developed. For example, I don't get why just a couple of abilities can be upgraded, and not most of them. But they never changed this part in numerous patches and 2 DLCs, so I'm guessing it will stay like this forever. Companions also have some post-abilities specific talents, different for every one of them. They give some bonus or advantage when that companion is using that post-position's ability, but they are pretty marginal. Pay attention to some companions' quests and after Chapter 3, because the game will empty your ship's post slots and never warn you about it. You may find out at the next battle, and you can't assign posts in combat. In the actual Void fight, you have a hologram for simulating and considering your ship's tactical placement, just as in ground combat. The ship has 3 acceleration phases, depicted by different green color gradients, but for the life of me, I never found any utility in them. The only thing to consider is that you have to finish the ship's turn in the last phase, and some ship components will let you fire microcannons twice, for example, in different phases. It's never been a big deal for me. Speaking of weapons, the big difference with ground combat is that you can fire all the ship's weapons in the same turn, provided you have the targets in range, and that attacking doesn't erase the ship's movement points. A lot of space combat consists of positioning and firing the biggest number of weapons you can. For some general tactics in Void combat, from experience, I can tell you to launch torpedoes before moving your flagship. They'll have a better chance to be in the thick of things when ships start to group together. Notice that torpedoes do not only need to connect to an enemy ship to damage it, but if you can maneuver them right next to your enemy, use the detonate button on the torpedo's UI for the same effect. Pay attention to the enemy's torpedoes and don't get in their way. It may seem obvious, but sometimes you might forget about them. Try to anticipate their movement. Do not get your flagship in the center of the fight, or enemies will most likely focus fire on you. Flank them instead, moving on the outskirts and give them a taste of their medicine by focus firing a single enemy ship at a time. This is a turn-based combat game. Action economy is queen. The fewer enemies you have to face, the better you fare. As a last note, Void Shadows introduced some special zones in Void ship combat. You may encounter gas clouds that, if you enter them, reduce your firing capabilities but also make you much more difficult to hit, or explosive clouds that increase the damage you deal and also the one you receive. There are a few of them. They're not a game changer, but they may be fun to exploit in certain battles with a lot of enemy ships or against the Void Station. I hope this guide will be of use for any of you who are approaching Rogue Trader for the first time. I know this is a lot to take in, but an understanding of the game's basic mechanics will carry you a very long way. Rogue Trader is a big game that's now reached its full maturity, with 4 major patches and 2 DLCs. I think it's the perfect time to jump in. Also, this is the biggest guide I've ever made. It took quite a lot of time and effort, in the hope that some new players may find it useful. You heard some voice or tone changes in the audio. That's because I register when I can. While the recording setup is always the same, my voice is not the same on different days or at different times of the same day, and it tends to be a pretty rough voice. I do the best I can, always trying to be a little better than before. Sadly, I think I've reached the point where the only tangible improvement would be to have a fully dedicated recording studio, with foam everywhere to avoid echoes, and that's not feasible at the moment. Believe me, I'm painfully aware of the sibilant echoes. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe, all the usual stuff that helps me reach more people on the platform. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.